I think when you look at the Nigerian economy, I mean, what we're seeing is a classic case of where there's been diversification of GDP. If you actually look at the breakdown, oil and gas represent 13% now of GDP. Commodity-based products probably represent something like 35, 37%. And yet we're held hostage with the oil price. Why? Because there hasn't been a diversification of government revenue or diversification of exports. That speaks to a huge imbalance in the revenue base. So people are worried about what's going to happen to the budget and what's that going to mean for their project, what that's going to mean for the contracts. They're worried about whether the government, whoever the government is, actually understand what the real policy issues are and should be. They're worried about whether they're going to deal with the wastage and the leakages which drain the economy, whether they're APC or whether they're, in fact, you know, the dance, is Generations back on? Is Generations back on the television? Because if it isn't, forget Generations, turn onto the Nigerian parliamentary channel and just watch the dance. You know, who's sleeping with whose party, who's swapped. You know, it's fantastic. It's worse than Twin Peaks. I show my age, I suppose. People are worried. Professionals are talking about how Nigeria is perceived. Many of us are embarrassed by what has happened in the last few months and before that a few years. Why are we embarrassed? The Nigerian military was the strongest military in Africa, maybe outside of South Africa, maybe outside of Egypt. And for many years, it was actually, people took pride in it. Whether you hated the military dictatorship or not, the fact that Nigerians were intervening in Liberia, intervening in ECOWAS, everywhere, was a source of national pride. And now, Boko Haram is running into Nigeria for safety when it's chased by the Cameroonian army. We're not able to bring back, and it's not just the 200 girls. And please, let's understand that the scale of the problem, the scale of murder of Boko Haram goes beyond anything that Mrs. Obama, bless her cotton socks, has been made aware of. It is grotesque, and it is grotesque that not enough has been done about it. Whether it's President Jonathan's fault or whether it's the fault of the ruling elite, the fact is we have a country that's perceived as incapable of securing the lives of its citizens, and that is worrying. Boko Haram's effect on the economy is not talked about a lot, but it's beyond whether it's boosting arms sales or putting off investors. It's destroying the agro-economy, not only in the northeast, but lower down in the plateau, because the farmers are displaced. There are about 1 million people displaced within Nigeria. That is a huge cost to a government whose revenue sources are being depleted. You know, there is a sense in which the leaders, so-called, are arguing, they're fiddling while Rome is burning. And that really is worrying people. They're saying, are you really addressing the issues? I don't know whether my graduate son or graduate daughter, I don't know when they're going to get a job. I've tried every connection I know to get them into a job, but there are no jobs to be had of any value. Once they finish youth service, we have a youth service corps, we have national service in Nigeria, what are they going to do? So there's a worry now that the returning diaspora, which has helped spur the economy over the last 10 years, are finding that they may have to be going back out again. And that is actually a terrible thing for the country, because it's a second brain drain. And this time they may not come back if our leadership don't address the basic bread and butter issues of security, of power, of proper infrastructure, and of critically education. So that's what people are talking about. And amidst that, in a colorful, typical colorful Nigerian way, we describe the various politicians. You should just Google YouTube and see some of the see Nigerian creativity at its best. I mean, people say that Nollywood is the third biggest film industry. I think that's just plain prejudice against Nigerians. I think we're bigger than Hollywood. Frankly, and I do, because the creativity is fantastic. But bringing it down to business, just very briefly, What I tell my team, what I tell my colleagues in Liberty is you have to be very clear about what your time horizon is. If you have a short-term time horizon, then Nigeria is not a place for you to be, because there will always be turbulence. It is it's part of the whoop and woof of the nation. There will always be short-term turbulence. If you're thinking short-term, unless you've won a few lotteries in your lifetime, it's not the place to be. It's a pure gamble. Nigeria is going through short-term turbulence, but it has been there before. And I'm not just speaking as an optimistic Nigerian, it will come through it. Why? Because the fundamentals of what's making the economy attractive haven't actually changed. Yes, out of the 170 million, you mustn't get fixated on 170 million, because there's only probably 30 million that you want to address for the products and the sales you want to make initially. They're the dynamic, they give the dynamic. And of that, there are probably 4 to 5 million that would be mid to affluent. But that's still enough to build an economy if you can harness it properly, if we can get a diversification of revenue so the government can do what it needs to do.